I beg you to try it, Patricia.
Let me get this straight, Carla. You disagree on the weapon, you disagree on the number of blows.
Listen to me, Patricia. You dare once in your life.
I do dare once in my life. This is Trish Wood, and you're listening to Trish Wood's podcast, which is called Trish Wood is Critical, because we are all about critical thinking. And if you're a newish listener, you might not know who that is beseeching me to be brave for once in my life, but it was a gentleman in Quebec who did shows with live insects for children and collected them as well. He would go on these bug finding missions to exotic places. And I was at Fifth Estate at the time. And it's usual that reporters on high profile shows have to do at least one segment where they look like a complete idiot. And that was mine, because he wanted to put like a 15-inch long live centipede on my arm. And I was having none of it. And of course, hamming it up a bit for the cameras, but I really didn't want to do it. But I think I did it, and I think it was fine. But anyway, that's what he's saying for once in your life, do it. So that's that, a little bit of business. We have a very, very interesting show for you today. I think the dam is breaking on some COVID policy revelations in the UK. There is an event underway at the Telegraph newspaper called the Lockdown Files. And I'll just give you the gist of what's happened as I know it. A woman by the name of Isabel, I think it's pronounced Okashot. I hope I'm right. She's an editor with Talk TV, journalist. But interestingly, she was also working on a book with the former health secretary for the UK, Matt Hancock. You'll recall he was busted for kissing a colleague who he ended up leaving his wife for. Yes, that Matt Hancock. So she was given all of these WhatsApp messages, like 100,000 or something like that. And she was working on a book for him, and the messages were part of that book project. But then in reading the messages, she got so upset about what they revealed about the UK government's response to COVID, which was fairly heavy-duty lockdowns and school closures, that she released them to the Telegraph newspaper. And boy, talk about setting a cat amongst the pigeons. It's excellent reporting. It's the kind of reporting the Telegraph and other newspapers should have been doing from the beginning of COVID, but didn't. But that's okay. We'll take this. And it's going to be a remarkable series. What I know about it is that it is behind a paywall. I got one of the articles yesterday in a sneaky way, and I'm going to purchase a subscription to the Telegraph in order to access this series. It's that important. And then what I'm going to do, because I love you, is put important bits of it into my Substack so you can have access to it too. It's remarkable to learn about the mindset of these people. It's as bad as we thought, and maybe even a little bit worse. They are not that bright. They are selfish. They are concerned mostly about how things look politically. They are casual. And I can honestly say, from what I've read so far, it doesn't really look like they had the health and well-being of British citizens top of mind during this response. So let me just read something to you from the first installment so you can kind of brace for what's coming. The other thing I want to tell you, who is our guest today, also an extraordinary story. He's a chap named Ray Mcginnis, who has written a very, very detailed piece on the lies that were propagated against the trucker convoy by the government and the media. Now, this is not a new subject, so don't think I'm repeating myself here, although some of it you will have heard before. But he has done this extraordinary deep dive into what happened, and also what national security experts were saying under oath at the commission about the fact that there was no danger posed whatsoever. I mean, it's really remarkable what he's done. So he did go there. He lives in Vancouver, but he went to the commission and stayed there for a period of time in order to do this extraordinary reporting. What it tells you is this was a psy-op from the get-go. It was a psy-op from the get-go perpetrated against Canadian citizens doing authentic protests, which we're all in a democracy supposed to be able to do. So this was a psy-op. It was set up by the government, and he exposes it in this article for Covert Action magazine. So stick around to hear from Ray Mcginnis. Also, before I read the Telegraph piece on the lockdown files, I'll do my pitch now, and then we can just kind of roll through our information today. So we are supported by y'all, and we're super grateful for it. We are mostly doing Substack now. So if you're on Patreon or you're on PayPal, please move your account over as soon as you can to Substack, because we've started doing exclusive content, paid content for our paying subscribers now. And this week we did an extraordinary interview with Colonel McGregor, who's one of my very, very favorites. Let me say this about that. If you are a paying subscriber and you didn't get it, let us know and we will make sure you get it. If you're on Patreon and PayPal, do move your account over so you can access it. We've been trying to do this for everybody, but it's been a little bit glitchy. So I don't want anybody to feel left out who's been supporting us. And we're going to be dropping extra material for people that's going to be behind a paywall. So that's a decision we made. We're not taking advertising. We may in the future, but we're not yet. And I like this model because it means we're absolutely free to do whatever we want. And that's what we do here. We do whatever we want. So, so we're covering the convoy a lot on this show. And I know that our global audience cares about that too, because the convoy gave people in other countries hope. And it's really important to understand what happened here. I will say that Ray said the moves against the trucker convoy in this country and the way it was handled by media reminded him of how China reframed Tiananmen Square. And he explains what China did, and it seems very, very much like what Trudeau did and his henchmen and women against the truckers. So do stick around for that. It's a really interesting interview, and you will be cross. But, it's okay to be cross if you're being informed. You need to know. And this is something else you can do with this. You can go to the website for Covert Action and print this off and give it to your friends and family who don't understand what happened around the convoy and how they were victims of a psychological and propaganda operation by their government, enabled by our brothers and sisters in the legacy media. Okay. So this is from the Telegraph in London, England, UK. Matt Hancock rejected the chief medical officer's advice to test for COVID all residents going into English care homes. Leaked messages seen by the Telegraph reveal. Professor Sir Chris Whitty told the then health secretary early in April 2020, about a month into the pandemic, that there should be testing for all going into care homes. But Mr. Hancock did not follow that guideline, telling his advisors that it muddies the waters. Instead, he introduced guidance that made testing mandatory for those entering care homes from hospitals, but not for those coming in from the community. Prior to the guidance, care homes had been told that negative tests were not required even for hospital patients. The guidance stating that those coming in from the community should be tested was eventually introduced on August 14th. Between April 17th and August 13th, 2020, a total of 17,678 people died of COVID in care homes in England. Shocking. I just want to say something about this and what we're talking about in this article too. We talk a lot on the show about the harms of lockdowns, the harms of school closures, the harms of masks, the harms of vaccines. But people were dying of COVID. And most of the people dying of COVID were old and vulnerable and in long-term care. And we didn't protect them either, right? It's not like the deaths that happened from lockdowns happened because they were protecting people from death who were vulnerable. They didn't even do that. That money that we lost by shutting down the economy and quarantining and confining healthy people, that money should have gone to keep safe people vulnerable in hospitals and long-term care facilities. So that's the other side of this. And we probably need to talk about that more. In the first 2 years of the pandemic, there were more than 40,000 COVID deaths in care homes in England, as the most vulnerable in society bore the brunt of the fatalities. Mr. Hancock himself later told MPs that transmission from the community, particularly from staff, was the strongest route for COVID into care homes. The Telegraph has obtained more than 100,000 WhatsApp messages sent between the then health secretary and other ministers and officials at the height of the pandemic. This is real reporting, folks. Wish we were doing that here. The messages comprise 2.3 million words, 3 times as many words as the King James Bible contains. So, wow, this is extensive. The communications span the years of the pandemic and reveal discussions between the then health secretary and those at the heart of the decision-making process, including the then Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Other conversations involve Sir Chris, that's Chris Whitty, the government's chief medical officer, and Sir Patrick Vallance, its chief scientific advisor. The messaging groups have names such as Top Teams, COVID-19 Senior Group, and Crisis Management, the name of a group created to deal with fallout from Mr. Hancock's relationship with his aide, Gina Cola-D'Angelo. This is the woman he left his wife and children for. Over the coming days, the Telegraph will reveal the messages which lay bare the extent to which groupthink among aides and ministers affected pandemic decisions. The messages also reveal the often casual approach that ministers took to making major decisions, including the call to close classrooms, introduce face masks in school, and provide testing in care homes. They show how Mr. Hancock expressed concerns that expanding testing in care homes would get in the way of his self-imposed target of 100,000 COVID tests per day. So this is bad. And it's all coming out. And the Telegraph, and they were one of the not great British media outlets. They were right in there with the fear porn. So it's amazing that they're doing this. I think once you dump all this evidence on a news organization, even if they're complicit in the problem, they have to do something about it. So we're going to follow this for you. Go to my Substack. And as this story unfolds in the British press, I'll be reporting bits of it curated for you on my Substack so you can pay attention and see how far this thing goes. Okay. So again, my interview today is with Ray Mcginnis, and I'm going to just read you the headline of the article. Commission reveals that Trudeau government lied about nature of truckers' protests in Ottawa last February to justify invocation of Emergencies Act, right? Lying is not good. I know the government spin, politicians spin, but I'll tell you something. Lying is not good, and we've got too damn used to accepting lies. All through COVID, we accepted lies, and we accepted a ton of lies around both the Emergencies Act, the way the Trudeau government dealt with this, and I think also there are a multitude of untruths in the Rouleau report. So here is my interview with Ray Mcginnis. Hi, Ray. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. It's good to be speaking with you. I really enjoy I've listened to numbers of your shows online, and I really appreciate what you do in the world.
Oh, thank you. It's been a hard slog the last 3 years. Wow. It just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And I'll return the favor at the risk of us descending into kind of mutual smarminess, but I actually mean it. That when I read your piece in, is it called Covert Action?
Yeah, Covert Action magazine, and down in Washington, D.C. Yeah.
Yeah, and I recognize some of the names, John Kiriakou and some of the people I really admire. But what was interesting was how absolutely detailed is your takedown of any kind of possible legitimate underpinnings for what happened to the truckers. I've been reporting a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but I saw this and I thought this is the whole, he's delineated the whole picture in an investigative way. So thank you for that.
Well, it was it's been a real journey with this, because I would almost call myself, I'm now receiving my old age pension very recently. And I did not picture myself, I haven't been a journalist, although I've taught writing workshops and have a couple of books, but it was almost out of I also want to say that in my life, I only know one person who's a truck driver in my whole circle. In my life. And so for me to be writing about this or thinking about this, because truck drivers up until the convoy happened were just people that, maybe someone from Amazon would come and deliver a book to me, or I would see yeah. trucks on the freeway or on the major arteries in Vancouver, and that was it. We were passing each other on the street, and I never talked to truck drivers, especially. So I'm not someone who's got a connection with truck drivers, but this has been quite a learning curve for me about what goes on in politics in this country now.
Well, it is quite interesting because I am the opposite of you. I'm also from out west, by the way, but my father was in the trucking business my whole life. And so I was around it a lot, and I kind of learned to really love, these kind of big galoots, right? And was kind of flabbergasted that in this day and age, the political left is demonizing working class people in this way. I was pissed off about that from the get-go. But just also commenting about your age, which is quite funny because I also would be getting a pension, except I'm not yet, and I will, but I could. But I'm also an old lefty who's no longer that. I'm now politically homeless. So I think it's really interesting that people like you and I, who were kind of classical liberals, actual champions of the underdog, like the real underdog, are now some of the people seeing through the BS and doing the deep dives on it. That's really, really important for me because young people don't get it mostly, right?
That's true. And having a grandfather who was a farmer in northern Alberta, who was part of the movement for the United Farmers of Alberta, and then the CCF and the NDP, my grandfather was someone I looked up to. And I was a personal acquaintance, I would say, of Jack Layton, and helped a bit, on his, when he was working in civic politics in Toronto. So
me too. Yeah, me too. He was a friend. Yeah.
Yeah. So I can't imagine Tommy Douglas or Jack Layton feeling good about how the NDP is showing up the last few years during the pandemic, and especially regarding the protests last year.
That's a really interesting thing for you to say, because how can I put this without giving too much away? I sit on the periphery of people who are kind of Layton legacy adjacent. Let's put it that way. Mm-hmm. And as much as I love Jack, the people who were around Jack then have morphed into what Jagmeet Singh is today. And so I like to think that Jack is frozen in time as a legitimate champion of the underdog and someone I admired very much. I lived in Riverdale, Toronto, so I had an NDP trifecta, right? I had City Hall was Paula Fletcher. I forget who the MPP was, but he was a New Democrat, and then Jack was our MP, right? So, and I worked for all of them at that point in time.
Yes.
But I fear all those people now who are still there are the people that we question. So would he have stayed pristine in his thinking, in his logic, in his moral framework? I don't know. I hope so.
Yeah,
I hope so.
I guess I hope so too, but you're right. We can't know because there have been a lot of surprises in terms of how people have been showing up recently that I could never have believed.
Yeah, well, the ideology is strong, and interestingly, that is kind of what your article breaks through. I had Tamara Leach on the show last week.
Oh, yes.
And for almost 2 hours. And so people may be saying, Trish, why are you doing another convoy show? And we have a lot of American and UK and European listeners too. And so they may be saying, why are we doing more? But I really feel that the truckers' movement and how they were brought to heel by this government is of global importance and significance. And I think until we fully understand what happened here, we are all going to be vulnerable to the same forces pulling it off again. So we have to keep deep diving it. And so that's why you're on, because I saw this and I was like, okay, this guy has done what I was hoping someone would do.
Well,
so let's talk about it. So the headline, I'm just going to go through in a sense what you've written. Commission reveals that Trudeau government lied about nature of truckers' protests in Ottawa last February to justify invocation of Emergencies Act. So that's something we've all the smart people have been saying for a while, right?
Yes.
but the cut line, the level is anti-vaccine mandate protesters were falsely accused of being rapist. I missed that one. White supremacist and violence prone by a Liberal prime minister who endangers Canadian freedom. So can I just am I right in reading that you voted for Trudeau at some point in our lifetime?
I did vote for him in 2015. Now the thing is, I live in Vancouver Centre, and the Liberals could decide to run as their candidate a Canada Goose, and it would be elected Liberal. I mean, there was a time when that riding was a bit different demographically, and also in terms of its boundaries. And Pat Carney of the Conservatives was once a sitting member, but it's strongly a safe seat for the Liberals. So I voted Liberal. I thought, okay, well, why not? I mean, I usually vote NDP, but voting NDP in that riding is it's a lost cause anyway. So so there were a lot of people who were friends of mine who were really concerned about Stephen Harper being reelected. I was not a fan of Stephen Harper. Wasn't a fan of the no, let's not discuss why we're going to go get involved in Afghanistan. I mean, pros and cons, but you didn't want to have any discussion in Parliament because it might upset the troops. And I thought, anyway, so I had a lot of reasons.
No, it's interesting. I think this gives you credibility. And the people who listen to this show understand that in 2015, I was a Bernie supporter. I was crying when he lost the primary or handed it to Hillary is what actually happened. But I'm probably further toward conservative or maybe libertarian now, maybe than you are. Like I will never trust the left again, ever on anything, given what's happened and the damage they've wrought on many, many fronts. So it's interesting, I think, for our listeners to hear that people who actually think critically can kind of go against the political framework that they've believed in for much of their lives. I think it's a really positive thing.
Yeah. And I want to say too, as we get into my article, that if there were people who, I'm not in favor of arson, for example. So if somebody actually is setting fire to a building, I want that person to be charged with it. If somebody has actually raped somebody, I want them to be charged. If somebody has uttered a death threat against the prime minister or phoned in a bomb threat to a hospital, I want all of those. But when we're running a society based on simply media and politician allegations, and then it turns out that there's nothing to the allegations, then we're going into a very different society, which is really weird and scary for me.
Well, and that's such a good point, because we've been following that kind of nonsense in the United States, right? That allegations are made, they're traded between lefty media and politicians, and they kind of enhance each other's positions. And then when the stories are proven to be false later, it doesn't matter because they already got what they wanted, right? It's a tactic, I think. And I remember on one of the things that happened I don't know if it was January 6th or something else, but the politicians were actually saying, well, no, I think it was on the Russia hoax thing that they were saying, oh, well, yeah, we know it's true because we read it in the Washington Post or in one of the kind of smaller lefty media outlets, as if that is a credible source of something. And I saw that happening here around the convoy too, right? That nobody was deep diving facts. They were just kind of, politicians were quoting media and media were quoting politicians, and nobody was actually looking at what was happening.
Yeah. I remember a moment like when, I don't have a television, and I haven't had one since 1991 with the Persian Gulf War. And I was upset with the media coverage, and I thought, I'm just going to get my radio and read online or read my physical newspaper. So I think part of where I come at this is I wasn't bombarded with all of the nightly news visuals that other people were. I mean, I would be sitting down in my bubble with different people in my, peripheral to my social bubble back a year ago. And I'd be sitting down to lunch or a coffee, and I'd be sitting across some people who were just exploding in outrage because of what they were seeing in terms of how angry they were about the truckers because of, all the things that they were seeing, and everything that they were seeing and being told, they were accepting completely. I mean, it was just as if Moses had come down Mount Sinai with the 10 Commandments, and the 11th commandment was, thou shalt believe everything that the media is telling you about the convoy. So I remember at one point just like saying to someone, I don't know what to think. And then from there on, I got to find out that there were other things going on besides what we were all being told.
But interesting that you were, hanging out with people who were thinking those things. When you challenged them on their perceptions, what response did you get? I'm just wondering how. Like, it seems to me that the psy-op or whatever this was to frame the convoy a certain way was really, really successful.
Yeah, it was very successful. So, when I'm having these visits, once upon a time before the pandemic, I'd be seeing these people, these friends, maybe every 3 weeks or so. Now I'm seeing them every 4 or 5 months. And so every little conversation that's risky is like, do we really need to talk about this now? So, at first back in February, I would just be listening to people being outraged and exploding and trying to, almost just get them to calm down. Never mind the right or wrong of what they were thinking. Just let's try and have a nice lunch.
What were they mad about? Do you remember specifically what they were mad about?
Well, they were mad about the arson. The people had driven all the way from British Columbia to set apartment buildings on fire. They were angry that one person I had a conversation with back in November after I'd been to the public hearings of the commission, and I told them where I had been, and we did have they listened to and I'd written another article earlier on, and I'd sent them that one that I wrote back in the fall, I guess, and then they got on the phone. And they talked to their friends in Ottawa who had sat down and watched the nightly news on CTV and who just rehearsed all the things that they learned from the nightly news on CTV. And so this friend of mine came back to me and said, I'm doubling down. I believe that all the protesters were only angry white supremacist males. And, there's nothing, I decided after I got that email back, I just wrote back and, to understand, I said, this is what you're telling me. Cause it's really, it's past the point of almost being possible to have a conversation besides saying, I hear what you're saying. Because the place, the location of anger and the firewall of not being able to hear anything besides their own silo, what they're saying, was so severe. I just thought, I don't know. I'll pray for you. I don't know what I can say, because there's not. We kind of got to a point where I thought, okay, I could say something more. I could say, well, I've spoken to, like, when I was at the hearings, there were people during the breaks, and there was one young African Canadian man who was talking about having brought his mother down to the protests, and she was, watching the TV and worried and everything. And he said, "No, Mom, it's okay." And then she goes down, and after she'd been walking amongst the protesters, she said to him, I can't, I don't understand what they're saying on the TV news. These people are so friendly. So I know. I mean, I know that there were, there were plenty of people of color, although, a large majority were white. So, but it's like, there's a conversation I might have with this person if they do any kind of shifting at all, but I don't know what would shift them. They're like rock solid.
That I actually, listening to you say that, it almost makes me feel like crying, because I don't know where we go from here. I know exactly who you're talking about, because I've had those same discussions with people about COVID-19 and the fact that children don't die of it unless they're already compromised. And I've had people look at me like I am, the witch queen from Wizard of Oz, like I'm a nutcase, right? They just, and you can present evidence and data and statistics and numbers and Marty McCary and everybody else. They will not change their minds. And I do see a parallel between the COVID-19 psy-op, which is not to say that COVID doesn't exist. It does, but I'm talking about the failure of public health policy and the way it's been protected by lies in the media and politicians, right? Under these awful rubrics of abundance of caution and all that kind of stuff, right? I think these two things are really, really similar. And unless we get this sorted, right? This is a question I would normally ask at the end of an interview. It's kind of a mop-up question, but I'll ask you now because I feel that's kind of where we're going right now. What do we do about this? Like how do we maneuver around psyops like COVID-19, like what happened to the truckers, in order to preserve any semblance of cohesion in this country and maybe democracy, which I don't think we have right now, and also our own mental health. And don't tell me that, indie media is going to do it, because I don't think that's necessarily the full piece of it. I think there's something else at play here. What do you think?
I think that our own inner landscape and the health of that inner landscape, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, we need to be able to maintain our own anchor. We need to have an ability to see through what's not trustworthy and what is trustworthy. And insofar as we can do that, we need to keep searching for what is true. And I mean, the first thing is I had to move away from the insistence of other friends that what was happening in Ottawa last winter was an insurrection. And the only way that I knew how to do that was to then start to do my deep dive that I've done and to go to the commission myself and listen to the public hearings. And so I think that,
but we can't do that, Ray. The whole country can't, right? So then how do we solve this on every level? You mentioned spiritually, mentally, factually, as citizens, what do we do? Because I interviewed Tamara last week and I don't know how she stays so serene, but if people were saying about me the things they're saying about her, which are demonstrably false, I would be driven mad. And why would anybody go into politics or public service now anyway if they can do this to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very sobering and chilling time that we're going through, something kind of akin to, I think, of McCarthyism in the 50s in the States.
Yeah.
And where people are not allowed to say something. I mean, you know the kind of article I've written that we're talking about now, and I showed someone an article I'd written earlier, which covers the same topic, and the response to me was to call me an anti-vaxxer. Oh. And that was really interesting because, now I had heard Rochelle Walensky, is she, from the CDC back in early August of 2021, concede in an interview with Wolf Blitzer on CNN that actually the vaccine didn't prevent transmission or infection. And so, and I was late in the game with, I had my mother's 90th birthday and a whole bunch of invites, and I needed to be there. I also had to go out of country on a flight that was really a have-to flight. So, for the first time in my life, I got vaccinated, not because I believed that the vaccine was going to be helpful to my health and knew that it could be possibly harmful, but I got it for social reasons and for coercion and for a must-do travel flight to South America. So that's
So you're not an anti-vaxxer, is what you're saying, right?
Well, it's odd for someone like me who's received 2 doses to be called that. Never mind the long list of vaccines, Japanese encephalitis and all kinds of other things, yellow fever, that I've gotten over the years as I've traveled to nearly 30 countries. So it's just, people are living in a place where very quickly they want to put someone in a box and seal it away in a storage space somewhere.
Yeah. No, it's true. I mean, I didn't get the vaccine and I paid quite a high price for it socially in many, many ways. I still can't go to America, and I missed my kid's graduation from uni out in Halifax as well, which he was fine about. He was really gracious. I sent my other kid instead, but and I'm not against vaccination generally speaking. Right. I just did a risk benefit ratio and said, wow, 6 months of testing. I'm not going to die if I get COVID. So why would I do this? It was really a simple equation for me. Right. And then I thought, well, I'll just, and plus I'm a stubborn old cow, right? Like I don't like, when I hear a mantra being safe and effective, being pushed by the government and media, given the number of pharmaceutical products liability cases I've reported on, I get my back up, right? Because I don't like that. I don't think it's good for us to be treated that way. Okay, so let's get into your article, which, as I said, I think is spectacular. I want to ask you just generally, would you describe what happened to the country and to the trucker movement as a kind of a psy-op? I mean, this was published in Covert Action, right? So does it have that kind of feel for you?
It does, because I think that it's clear that there are, people in the Prime Minister's office and Public Safety Minister's department, people in the cabinet that had a kind of like there was a narrative about how they wanted to frame how the general public was to understand the convoy, and these talking points were already being bandied about just before the Liberal cabinet went into their retreat on the 24th of January. So like the 23rd of January, which is when the trucks are really leaving the West Coast, they'd already decided this is what we're going to tell people about. This is our view of these people, that they're angry, that they're white supremacist and racist and insurrectionist, mercenaries, terrorists, and it seems to me that I've read Rupert Subramania's piece on the flimsy or non-existent arguments for the the travel mandate vaccines, because back in August of was it last summer, came out that the people in this discovery for this court case that was determined to be moot back in October, that actually no key person had recommended to the government that they have a vaccine mandate requirement for people to travel domestically or internationally, because they didn't see any scientific basis for it. My sense is too that if the government had to sit down, because protesters included scientists and doctors, and if they'd had to sit down with the people at Public Health Canada agency and talk about, natural immunity, if they'd had to talk about the safety of the vaccines for children and so on, they might have found themselves up against the wall with not an awful lot to say, under scrutiny, under cross-examination, because when the parliamentary committee met in January of 2022 and had Minister Duclos and then Dr. Theresa Tam speaking to them, and they were asked, do you have any data to suggest that truck drivers, are spreading COVID-19? And they had no data. And yet the government insists that they must be vaccinated. I mean, that was when I just thought, what's going on here? Why would not, for the sake of getting along, why wouldn't just simply a PCR test at the border be good enough?
Well, and they travel alone in their trucks too. It's not like they're out at these super spreader events, to steal their phrase. They're driving alone. So how are they? Yeah. Right. This makes no sense.
Yeah, they're driving alone. They're also not driving in their trucks and then getting out at a senior's long-term care facility. I mean, they're going to a hospital. They're going to a lumber warehouse. They're going to a hardware store. So it's
So you were talking about the kind of language that they were discussing. I mean, when did they start framing how they were going to describe the truckers, and why did they use the language they used? Were they taking this a page really from America's political landscape right now, where every white male voter who doesn't vote Democrat is a white supremacist? Is that kind of what they were doing?
Yes, I mean, the text messages between I think Adam Cohen with who works with Marco Mendicino, public safety minister, and then Mary Liz Power, who's in the Prime Minister's office, and so that's probably late on the 23rd of January, talking about framing this as a January 6th kind of January 6th North, extremists and white supremacists and so on. So. And I think it's outrageous that the government has people who see citizens that are now coming and protesting, and wants to pigeonhole them in a very negative way so they can be ignored and demonized.
And so awful. And I think we're very, very immune from what we used to call spin. I mean, this goes beyond spin. This is just, I mean, it's undemocratic what they've done. I feel actually this is kind of bordering on criminal. That sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, when you've got, they're saying, well, you've got some friends in global TV that can, push this narrative along, and Marco Mendicino, he's going to wait for a few days before he starts saying these same kind of things, and all of the like Prime Minister Trudeau by the 26th of January comes out with his fringe minority unacceptable views, so-called freedom convoy. So he's, they're all on the same page, and treating the protesters as the very worst of the worst, a threat to the very existence of our nation.
Yeah. I mean, it was just absolutely terrible. I must say those phrases they were using worked well in our merch store. We sold a lot of hats with unacceptable views
Yeah.
written on it. And the fringe minority, I mean, just absolutely shocking and so obvious around the world. People globally were saying, what is this guy's problem? I meaning Trudeau. And I remember sitting in my little studio and saying to myself as a journalist, an actual journalist, why aren't the media scrum people saying, prove it? Where is your evidence for what you're saying? Where's your evidence they're fringe? Where's your evidence that they're misogynistic? Where's your evidence that they're all the things you're saying? They just let the government get away with saying whatever they want and amplifying what is clearly an absolutely corrupt message. It made me furious. I could barely stand watching it some days.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a recent conversation with a friend I've known for years who is in the media, who seems to believe that had it not been for Russian government agents, the whole thing wouldn't have been inspired. And I mean, my jaw drops, and I'm speechless because it's such an easily disproven thing. The CBC made the allegations and then they retracted it quietly a week later. And the CBC ombudsman in October, chastised the broadcaster and said that you need to remember what kind of responsibility you have and how the impressions you make on the general public, and that you need to remember to report stories based on evidence.
Do you think that, just getting to CBC for a minute, because they certainly did not do a very good job of covering the convoy. What was it? Was it as much cultural as it was just kind of malfeasance, in the sense that it seems to me, based on watching what they do now, that the people at the CBC who work there in journalism just don't like truckers anyway. I mean, there's just like a real rift between the people who consider themselves experts and the people who, get their hands dirty for a living. And is that maybe why it was so easy for them to believe and not question what the Prime Minister was saying?
I think that there is, in a lot of circles in our society, in kind of the managerial class, the middle upper class, in academia, in the churches, which is what I know a bit, and in government and business, there's an awful lot of groupthink that goes on. Yeah, if your superior says, I really like avocado toast, all of the people that they supervise will soon be ordering avocado toast and raving about it. I mean, there's a real we're looking around for the signals and the signs so that we know what's approved and what's not approved. And as a result, people get into some really bad, lazy habits of not questioning all kinds of things.
Well, what I remember about the CBC, I won't mention any names, but the big reporters who would go racing out to Nova Scotia at the first sign of a mining disaster to champion the miners, as they should, are the same people now who, if those very same miners were at the trucker protests, would be calling them white supremacists. This is what I cannot abide, right? This is kind of my hill to die on, that these people haven't changed. The reporters' worldview has been corrupted somehow.
Yeah, it's been corrupted, and they've got, and there's also some sort of privilege and contentment, perhaps, in saying, well, as long as the story that we're reporting points the finger at some other group, at some other individual, as long as no one's pointing the finger at me, I'm happy to either be involved in energizing this, or I'm happy to watch it as sport almost.
As sport, yes. Okay, so let's keep going through this great piece you did. So you just analyzed like the early days of this. You write about the idea that truckers were considered heroes until they started protesting. protesting. Explain that turn of events, would you, please?
Sure. Well, I mean, the Prime Minister had, I think it was a Thank a Trucker hashtag, and, talked about how these truck drivers, I think back in March of 2021, when there are people already getting the vaccine earlier that year. Truckers weren't getting the vaccine, but nonetheless, the Prime Minister lauded them for doing the hard work of, all the way through the pandemic and getting, product to pharmacies and hospitals and grocery stores and gas stations and on and on and on. And then all of a sudden, there's this complete reversal in November of 2021 saying, we're going to let you know you all have to be vaccinated by mid-January. You can't cross the border. And I find it astonishing still that this was the choice that they made. And now, of course, the Biden administration is also doing this for the Mexico-U.S. border. Yeah. But outside of the U.S.-Canada, U.S.-Mexico border, it's hard for me to verify that there were any other borders, land borders around the world where this was in force. I mean, you could be a truck driver going across Europe. You could even go through Austria. I mean, Austria was making unvaccinated people for a while pay huge fines in the thousands of dollars every quarter for being unvaccinated. But yet, truck drivers in Austria could drive all over the European Union. So no matter how harsh the consequences for being unvaccinated, say in whatever country, truck drivers were still seen by the vast majority of nations around the world as essential services to keep the supply chain going, to keep the economy strong. And because of that, they got this exemption. Yeah. And then suddenly they didn't have one in Canada.
I also think that should anybody ever do any journalism and get the communications between Prime Minister Trudeau and President Biden, I suspect that there was a lot of pressure on the Prime Minister from Biden too. They were talking just before the Emergencies Act as well. And I kind of feel like Trudeau was dancing to his tune a bit there. Okay, so You have a part of your article that says the official story. I think this is really interesting because you kind of do it like a day-by-day building of this narrative. And in it you say that the media narrative instantly emerged that these were going to be bad people. And you quote, January 25th, the CTV headline screamed, "So many angry people. Experts say online conversation around trucker convoy veering into dangerous territory." And you say that CTV interviewed a guy named Kurt Phillips. So tell me about that kind of beginning of the framing of this narrative. Who is this guy?
Yeah, so he's with Anti-Racist Canada. He's he seems to be somebody who's always, he's the founder of Anti-Racist Canada. He's always, getting a microphone put in front of him, and he's talking about racism, and so here he is now, insinuating that the truckers are racist. He says that he'd seen people online calling the trucker convoy Canada's version of the U.S. Capitol insurrection on January 6, 2021, for the truckers to ram their trucks into Parliament, and people encouraging the hanging of politicians.
So here's my question about that. Let me just stop you there as a journalist. What's wrong with this? Did they ever ask this guy to provide evidence of what he says he saw online, or did they just let him spout it?
They just let him spout it.
Yeah, I mean, it's shocking.
Somebody could have gone back to him at the end of everything, including the rather brutal
commission.
They could have said, "Are you aware that throughout the length of the protest, that no truck tried to ram the Parliament building? Yeah. There were no MPs hanging from rafters or I mean, this is, I mean, it's incendiary. It certainly achieves for the people who are anxious. I mean, he certainly is giving them reason to feel anxious, but it's without any foundation at all.
And they never ask for evidence. They seem to call whichever anti-racism, in quotation marks, expert or someone who's following something that's going to deliver. Because they never say, no, these are good people. They're actually not. They never say that. They always say, oh, they're terrible. Okay, that's what they do. The convoy was next framed as an inspiration of Russian President Vladimir Putin. So we talked about that a minute, but let's look at the language. So on January 28th, CBC reporter Neil Koksai mused, given Canada's support of Ukraine in this current crisis with Russia, there is a concern that Russia, see, this is how they do it. There is a concern that Russian actors could be continuing to fuel things as the protest grows, perhaps even instigating it from the outside.
Yeah.
I mean, really? Like that's any evidence for that, honey? Or are you just making it up? I mean, and what happened about that bit of information? What was it? Did it stand, or did they retract? Or
no, they retracted it. And I had one person who was saying, well, I mean, Elizabeth May, in her discussion about why she was voting for the Emergencies Act on the 22nd of February, cited Russia Today's coverage, and Russia Today's coverage. Russia Today reported on the 15th of February, the day after the Emergencies Act was invoked, that the CBC had alleged that Russia was responsible for inspiring the convoy on the 28th of January and had retracted it on the 4th of February. That was the story Russia Today ran. But somehow some people like Elizabeth May thought that that Russia Today is somehow amplifying and making worse the situation. The day after, when many protesters are now leaving after the invocation of the Emergencies Act.
Wow. And, I shouldn't say this because people will come for me, but I remember Russia Today, like 15 years ago, there was a lot of credible people on there, actually, as I recall. And then it became
Chris Hedges.
Yes, who's been on my show. Yes, I know. Like a lot of lefty people went on there, but now it's verboten because you're a Putin supporter if you do that. Okay. Then on January 29th, tell me about this CTV report from Mackenzie Gray.
Yeah, so she tweets a photo of a guy with a Confederate flag, and she says, "We've got our first Confederate flag of the day here on Parliament Hill," which would almost be like every day at Parliament Hill throughout the year, somehow we have a Confederate flag waver, or we can expect day after day after day to see spot the It's like playing bingo. You've got this open thing and under the eye. 2 down Confederate flag, and you wait till you see the Confederate flag waver, and then you say, "Okay, I've got that one toward a full house." But no, I mean, the response by the Florida Governor Ron DeSantis's press secretary Christina Pushaw, she says to Gray, "You claim to be a journalist, so why don't you interview him? You can ask him who he is and why is he flying a Confederate flag." I mean. It makes no sense. I mean, someone coming from Halifax or Vancouver or Prince George or Red Deer, a truck driver in Canada. I mean, the Confederate flag has to do with the antebellum South, pre-Civil War South. I mean, and there's nobody involved in the protest that's trying to signal that they want to establish slavery in Canada the way it looked, back in the day of. I mean, it's just ridiculous. But somehow this seems concerning to Mackenzie Gray.
Well, somehow, somewhere, I don't know her. I don't watch legacy media very much unless I'm watching it to critique it for a specific thing, because I go a little bit crazy when I see what's happened to my old profession. But somebody somewhere told Ms. Gray that it's fine to just take a picture and interpret it any way you want without ever actually doing any reporting on it. This is shocking to me. Does she not have an editor? Does her editor say, well, go find out who he is? Maybe he's just a nut. I mean, it's just shocking.
Yeah.
Very shocking. And so her questions, this DeSantis's, she said, if you just post a picture like this with no context, it looks like you're implying the entire convoy are racists. How do you know he isn't a plant, obviously? So getting to plants, then we're at the Toronto Star reporting the appearance of a Nazi flag. Not joking about Nazi flags, but this story is just absurd. Tell that one.
Yeah, so there is an individual who shows up with a swastika, the Nazi flag. They are walking around a lot of the time near and around the Chateau Laurier. The Chateau Laurier at the time, with its hotel guests, many of the hotel guests were members of the RCMP. But, here we are now. I mean, I don't, there may be somebody who knows, but there was nobody, it seemed, in intelligence, CSIS, RCMP, Ottawa Police Service, who walked up to the flag bearer and said, tell me about this flag. Why are you carrying it here? What's your name? We're going to take you in for questioning. Nobody thought to follow the flag bearer to their vehicle and write down their license plate for follow-up later. It seems that they were more interested in having, coffee and donuts at Tim Hortons. I mean, in the face of all of the rhetoric, you've got all this rhetoric, Marco Mendocino, the Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland, Bill Blair, are all talking about ideologically motivated, violent extremists. I mean, if there was ever any kind of incendiary symbol of any kind, perhaps a Nazi swastika would be it. But in the face of all the concern about ideologically motivated violent extremists, there's when someone appears with a swastika, the police and the intelligence just sit in their hands and let the person walk around and don't walk up to them and ask them anything. And this is just really an odd omission or lack of response in the face of what seems to be so concerning, at least on the TV.
Let me ask you this, because my impression also of that person is that they were not really commingling with the convoy, that they were kind of off on their own. Feel free to blue sky here. We don't know who it was or why they were there, but why do you think they were there? What are the possibilities in your view?
So somebody could show up, somebody could bring that flag. It's a poor choice, but they could bring that flag, suggesting that with some of the infringements with the charter, where the charter says that people are free to make a living, to travel in and out of the country with unencumbered and so on. Maybe that person was saying, we need to remember the slippery slope to
yes.
autocratic, maybe. I have no idea. Or they could have been saying, I'm a Nazi.
Yeah.
Or they could have been somebody who was a plant.
Yeah.
And so, anything is possible, but the focus of the Toronto Star on this single flag, or the CTV on the Confederate flag, anyone who saw a live stream from people going coast to coast at every intersection along the Trans-Canada Highway, on every overpass, nothing but Canadians with Canadian flags. Yeah. And so you have a sea from coast to coast of Canadian flags juxtaposed with one swastika and one Confederate flag. But what the media focuses on are those two flags, ignoring the Canadian flags all over the place.
I can't even believe it happened. It's so shocking. Okay, so I've talked about the arson story a lot on the show because I think our listeners know this, but I did call the Ottawa Police Department and I spoke to a person who investigated it, and he said they knew from day one it was a fake story. And yet he had to sit by and watch politicians and media repeating it until department was prepared to say it didn't happen. But tell how that story was used and abused against the convoy.
So there's this Mcginnis, who had a tweet, one of them about alleged arsonists. He says in his tweet, one of them taped the door handles so no one could get out. And I say, this apparently included the arsonists.
Yeah.
According to the story, a tenant who saw the arsonists lighting a fire in the lobby asked if they were truckers, and then decided to go to bed without calling 911, which is what you would do if you knew you were in a building that was on fire. And then
if you were committing arson, that you would admit you were with the truckers too. Like that also makes no sense, right?
Yeah. And then the mayor, held an emergency meeting, speaks to the press, and says, "Yesterday we learned of a horrific story that clearly demonstrates the malicious intent of the protesters occupying our city." But no apologies from the mayor. I don't think we've heard any apologies from the mayor since the story was confirmed to have nothing to do with the protesters at all by the Ottawa Police Service.
Shame.
Yeah, they also reiterated that again and underscored it in a with Steve Bell having to speak to a parliamentary committee on the 24th of March.
Wow. It's absolutely shocking. Shame on them. And at the end of the day, they were kind of reduced to talking about microaggressions and honking. They had this massive narrative that has been debunked at every level. And somehow it kind of remains as a justification for the Emergencies Act, even though none of it's true. Okay. I want to keep just going through a couple more of these, and then I want to talk about the really interesting analysis you did of what was said by people in positions of kind of monitoring public safety. But let's look at this. Okay. So Ottawa City Councillor Diane Deans referred to protesters as part of a nationwide insurrection, and the protesters themselves as terrorists and mercenaries who were trying to overthrow the government. I mean, ugh. So what is her deal? Like, how does she justify saying that? And where is the evidence for those allegations?
Well, I mean, there is no evidence of an insurrection. There is no evidence of terrorists and mercenaries. I mean, I guess FinTrack, which I'd never heard of before, is involved in tracking things like foreign influence and terrorist money laundering, and they reported to Parliament in early March that there was absolutely no one involved with the protests, none of the money, nothing to do with terrorism or insurrectionists, anything. And so it seems like people are just making. It's almost like there's a competition. Who can make the most incendiary allegation against the protesters? Okay, Diane, it's your turn. You do this today, Jim Watson will do this yesterday, and Catherine McKenna will do it tomorrow. So it's so irresponsible, and I cannot imagine. This is why citizens get turned off about politics, because you see people behaving in this unhinged way.
Well, I do think, and maybe I'm wrong, I hope I'm wrong, that there was at this point an actual level of malice between some of these politicians and the truckers for cultural reasons, right? I just think that they were blinded by their own narrative at some point, and very bad. Oh, okay. Beverly McLaughlin. That was upsetting. I used to really admire her. I guess I don't anymore. Tell me about what she said.
Yeah, I was sent her opinion piece in the Globe and Mail. I think this was days after around the time that the Parliament was voting on the Emergencies Act, and she had this, the truck convoy has revealed the ugly side of freedom, and she goes on about freedom, what is this? What does freedom mean? The answer is everything and nothing, everything. The right not to wear masks in public places, the right not to be vaccinated, the right to hold Ottawa's downtown residents and businesses hostages, the right to malign public officials and call for the Prime Minister's death, the right to shout epithets of people of color. And she, on so many levels. I mean, clearly she's someone who never went to the protests because she didn't meet all of the, the First Nations people, the Afro-Canadians, Asian Canadians, Indo-Canadians, and on and on, who were getting along. I mean, there's so many, live streams and YouTubes of people of different ethnic backgrounds, different races, embracing and high-fiving, and I mean, I think that the clan mothers who were standing with Tamara Lich on the 30th of January, talking about how this protest is all about peace, love, and freedom. I mean, I think there's a lot of people of color that would have a lot to say to Beverly McLaughlin about her misreading, to be kind, of what was going on. Never mind that to date, I mean, if you've had Tamara on your show recently, and she's become this cause celeb for people who defend the government because she's such an awful person, who's only been charged with mischief, as I understand it.
Only mischief and variations of counseling mischief and some other stuff, but yeah. Imagine if the media, given the way they've behaved, actually had someone who actually had charges of uttering death threats against the Prime Minister. They'd have a field day. That person would be on the cover of Maclean's magazine. Yeah, but there is nobody connected with the protests has ever been charged with uttering death threats against the Prime Minister. And so what she's doing is she's offering up something that we can all agree that uttering death threats against the Prime Minister is wrong. But it infers that someone has done this and nobody did. Well, what's interesting too is that she includes not wearing a mask and not wanting to be vaccinated in the same breath as uttering death threats against, and they do, right? That's the kind of weird cultural connection to all this stuff. What makes me very sad about former Chief Justice McLaughlin is that she was the Chief Justice at some point. I mean, presiding over courts that are supposed to be fact-finding institutions, right? That's, very scary for me. Okay, so sorry, go ahead. Please do.
I'll just add, I mean, I remember I talked to Brian Peckford at one point about this last year, and he said that, when you're part of the, first ministers, Supreme Court justices, other people that are kind of in the top tier of the who's who of Canadian politics and movers and shakers, you tend to be part of an establishment in a way where you generally, you give the benefit of the doubt regarding a story that's emerging. I mean, Brian Peckford's unvaccinated. He's told, it's no secret on his blog. But he says that initially when the story about the pandemic came out, the first few months, he gave it the benefit of the doubt. And then, so he, so there's a view which, like, Beverly McLaughlin is probably, watching CBC or watching CTV, trusting the media that she's always trusted, hasn't sat back and noticed how it's changed lately. And so she's writing her opinion piece out of that framework of surely I can trust the nightly news, and in which case she'd be wrong.
She would be wrong. Okay, last one I want to talk to you about before we move on to what we learned from expert evidence about how how the threat was non-existent. But Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino stated that threats of rape by truckers in Ottawa was one of the catalysts for the invoking. I never even heard about the threats of rape. So what is that story?
Yeah, well, he was testifying before the commission, and I mean he said these kind of things to the media, and then when he was cross-examined, They said, well, there were no charges of rape. And he said, well, just because there weren't any charges of rape doesn't mean that they didn't happen.
Wow.
So again, it just fizzles. But it's, I don't know what the kind of the psychology of some people is, that if they can worry about something or catastrophize about something, they need to just keep giving that thing life, even though most reasonable people would say, it's a dead horse, move on. But he still, insists under oath that this is somehow was legitimate.
It's unbelievable. It's kind of like the lockdown fanatics. They couldn't let it go, even though it wasn't working. They just got more and more addicted to the idea. So let's move on to the wonderful reporting you did on how a lot of people who gave evidence at the commission were saying, we didn't see any problems. And I even heard from somebody, they said that the crime was actually lower in Ottawa when the truckers were there. I don't know if that's true. I think
that's true. That's true.
Yeah. It's just wild. Okay. So the Ottawa Police Service held a press conference on February 8th stating that no protester was under suspicion for the attempted arson. So they backed down on that. No weapons in protesters' vehicles. None of that. So that is gone. And then, let's see. These news reports challenging the initial headlines dribbled out over weeks and months and were underreported. Yes, that's a good point that you say there, because when these really kind of florid stories, threatening stories, they were reported and then they were rescinded, either retracted or debunked. But that never got the kind of attention that the initial reporting did it?
No. It's and that's why I can talk today to people who still believe that all of the people who were protesting were white supremacists. There were no women, so on.
Yeah. Okay. So let's get to this thing you have here. It's you say that it's a quote, comments made by public figures, the media, were not premised in fact. So who was the person who testified to that? Patrick Morris. Tell me about him, what he said and where he said it.
So he's, Patrick Morris is the leading intelligence officer for the Ontario Provincial Police, and he is, somebody who was working with the police on the ground to go into, into the crowd and gather their intelligence to decide whether or not there's anything concerning, hostile, violent, whatever. And so, he's making his statements based on gathering intelligence, and then he's shocked at the disconnect between what he's finding, because he's providing, the cabinet is getting the information that he has. It's going up to them, and then suddenly Marco Mendocino and others are describing the protesters as being violent and threatening, and so he's noticing it's a huge problem with how he says, I was concerned with the politicization, concerned by the hyperbole, concerned by the affixing of labels without evidence to individuals' movements.
Yeah.
Under testimony, there was a lawyer for the Democracy Fund, Alan Honor, who quoted Morris in his letter. Morris had said in a letter, but now the public discourse is dominated by political figures in the media. And, so it's all of this discussion about extremism, terrorism, sedition is coming out of the politicians' mouths. It's not reflected at all in any of the intelligence reports.
Wow. So then we move on to, we have Carson Pardee, who is an OPP superintendent, testifying October 21st, 2022. he said that the media depiction of the protest in Ottawa was problematic. Well, it's amazing that he said that. The narrative about what was happening in Ottawa was being controlled and was one-sided. What was he getting at there, and how did he elaborate on that?
Well, he's talking about how, I mean, they're going down and seeing people who are, there are people who are retired police officers that he knows personally, that other people that he works with know personally. There are, their grandparents, grandchildren, the festive atmosphere, children making snow sculptures, eating hamburgers and hot dogs or samosas, the camaraderie between people of different ethnic backgrounds. There are people who are, who've been fired from their jobs, nurses, paramedics, people in the army, and so on. He's saying this is a very different crowd of people. This is not like a G7 or G8 crowd, perhaps. This is very diverse. And so he's saying, these people are not threatening.
And then there is a quote also of Superintendent Morris. I think he said this in the aftermath of the Valentine's Day invocation. He said on February 22nd, the Freedom Convoy protest was not comprised of ideologically motivated violent extremists. The actual leaders are not violent extremists with histories of violent crimes. I mean, everything that these people in the know are saying completely contradicts the government narrative. And yet we have a commission with a namby-pamby result that ends up letting the government off the hook. How does that happen?
It's astonishing because when I was, I was watching, I wasn't in Ottawa at the time, but I was watching highlights and also excerpts of this testimony and other. When all these different police officers were testifying, I thought, well, it's really clear that there was no threshold to trigger a national emergency based on all of the testimony. I mean, if I'd been able to write a 20,000 word article, which would be not what you want to do, but I could have cited another half a dozen police and intelligence people testifying before the commission, all saying things that align with what the people I've highlighted were saying, and so in the face of all of that, I wonder what, the thing that's shocking to me is that you have several Ottawa residents that spoke about not actual violence, but they talked about, how trying and wearisome and aggravating it was to listen to the horn honking. And I get that. Everybody would get that. Yeah. But as the RCMP correspondence that was entered as evidence said, that, no matter the decibel level of air horns, honking horns, or no matter how long, frankly, the rock concert that's supposed to end 11 p.m. goes on till 1 a.m. Doesn't matter. Those things do not trigger a national emergency. You deal with them, noise violations, all part of the criminal code or civil code, whatever the case. But Commissioner Rouleau decides to disagree with Superintendent Patrick Morris's intelligence assessments regarding the shocking lack of violence, and decides to lean on the phantom honking testified by the Ottawa residents as evidence of actual violence.
Wow,
that's I'm speechless.
I know. I can't. And I read a little bit more, and I recall this too. There was a person who said that the children who were in some of the cabs, which I think it's super fun that the kids were in the cabs of these trucks with their parents, right? I can't see anything wrong with that at all. Obviously not being mistreated. saying that children were being used as human shields. Where do they get this stuff from? It's like they're all in some fever dream or something. I just don't get it.
Yeah, this is Nathalie Duran, the deputy clerk of the Privy Council. The Prime Minister also, when he was asked under testimony, he said, "Well, why did they invoke the Emergencies Act?" And talking about violence, he said, "Well, there were children." He says there were the unknown interiors of trucks. I mean, this is the kind of world where you say, someone invites you to come over to their home in the summertime for barbecue, and you decline because you're afraid that you're going to be stung by a swarm of bees. I mean, really. I mean, this is government by what can we catastrophize about? What can we worry about that hasn't actually happened?
Well, and the sleeping compartments in those trucks are really cozy too, right? So that's, yeah. That's really, I just thought that was so far over the top. I also read, I'm recalling now, weren't they threatening to come and get people's pets out of the trucks too? Wasn't there a pet threat?
There was also a pet threat. We're going to remove your pets because they're also a threat to the to the security of the nation.
Just unbelievable. It's unbelievable. So you have Emergencies Act threshold for threat to national security not met. Yeah. Was there espionage? No, said Vigneault. Okay, who is Vigneault? CSIS director, David Vigneault. No, said Vigneault. Was there foreign interference, sabotage? No, said Vigneault. Was there any serious violence? No actual serious violence, said Vigneault. Was there a plot to overthrow the government? No, didn't even investigate it. Was so non-existent, said Vigneault. And yet, we are left with a commission report that A, it obfuscates, and B, lets the Prime Minister and this government off the hook.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to know when Commissioner Paul Rouleau was chosen, the former executive assistant of former Liberal minister, Prime Minister John Turner, if there was any kind of suggestion about how, what he should discover after after it's all over, like before, like if he was given any marching orders, because to go through the testimony and the transcripts, and then to see what the report excuses is just flabbergasting.
What should we make of this in the scheme of things? I mean, clearly, this was an operation, what happened to the truckers. It was an operation with media collaborating with government to end up with this result. So what do we do now?
Well, we need to find ways to correct the story. Maybe kitchen table conversations. We also need to train ourselves that insofar as we watch the nightly news on TV or listen to the news, we need to give ourselves permission to train ourselves to watch the news with detachment and say, after the nightly news is over, what have I been told? How do I know this? Who benefits? We need to be really scrutinizing the nightly news, the daily newscast, because otherwise we are simply a society now that this, I think that this is the most serious, and together it all enmeshed with what's been going on with the pandemic too. But this hijacking of what was going on the ground, and then the official account of what's happened is so untrue that and also people have learned now that Emergencies Act, it was a complete misunderstanding of what an Emergencies Act is for. It's not to solve a traffic jam in Ottawa, and it's not to solve horn honking. And And so we need to be able to start having conversations, I guess, to try and correct this this mistake in terms of, otherwise this will be taught as history, that this was, you know, the what happened, period. I'm hoping that, you know, back in 1970 with the FLQ crisis, it took 10 years or more until people began to really look back and see that there were some things that the RCMP did, burning down of barns and other things that it didn't go so well with terms of what the emergency powers that under the War Measures Act at the time. And I'm hoping that if there's enough conversations about what's gone on, that people will start to see that we need to pay close attention to what the media is doing. And we also need to be paying attention to our own emotional responses, because what this story shows us is that people in our country can sit down in front of the TV, maybe after a hard day's work, and they relax and hope that they can just receive passively whatever media narratives they're given. And if these narratives are really emotionally charged, and there's some scapegoat out there that the media is happy and the politicians are happy to blame for something, it seems that the general public in Canada right now is really up for joining in on that scapegoating. And that makes us a dangerous society, because then, I wonder now, if I had lived in Salem, Massachusetts in 1692, and if I had thought, I don't believe that these women that are being accused of being witches are witches. Are there any people that were neighbors, other people in the community in Salem that I could have convinced to put down their pitchforks and torches, to not walk to the center square and look forward to the hanging of the witches? I don't know. I think that we need to be really careful with our rhetoric, because otherwise this can go in some very bad directions, even for those that are spouting it.
Wow, that was a really interesting place you just went. I happen to be reading a book, I believe it's called The Witches, that is quite an important historical take on what happened. And I'm reading it for the very reason that you just talked about. I feel like I always say Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the Donald Sutherland pointing the finger at the person who's not yet an alien. But The Witches is, that's also an interesting analogy. And I'll just say it. I mean, let's not forget the run up to the Holocaust. I'm not saying the Holocaust, you can't use that analogy, but in the years before, when people were slowly being captured by public health and then told to hate and scapegoat the Jewish people, we have to be careful. And Rwanda too. Wow, that happened almost overnight, So I feel very afraid, and I will share this with you, and I'll share with the audience too. After reading your piece, which confirmed what I knew, but really solidly confirmed it with excellent reporting, I felt
Thank you.
Quite a lot of hatred in my heart for the people who did this to the truckers. I do. And I felt hate around some of the COVID things. Yep. But this feels bigger to me. And I don't like that part of myself. I'm really just speechless that they're getting away with it, that politicians I know they spin, but this kind of a lie operation against authentic Canadians authentically protesting an actual thing is, I don't know. I feel like we've really lost something, and that they need to be held to account. I do.
I think that there's another, I can go to another place. I remember reading about 15 years ago about I never thought at the time of the Tiananmen Square and the student protests protesting for democratizing China in 1989 or so, the story I was learning about the news back on As It Happens and everything back at the time was about these are students protesting to liberalize democracy, and they're standing, the student in front of the big tanks and everything. I never thought about how is that story being reported in China. And I learned years later that the story was being reported like this. The people who are protesting in Tiananmen Square are criminals, ruffians, and anarchists. They hate the Chinese culture, and they hate China. And that's why they're protesting. They need to be put down. And so if somebody might try and write a letter to the editor in a paper in Beijing, or if they have a talk show, if they would try and express the point of view that actually these students were decent people, 99% of Chinese people in the citizenry would completely write it off as nonsense. We know they're criminals and ruffians and anarchists. And so I remember thinking about that and thinking about, well, isn't it great living in Canada? But now that we've gone through this experience with the way the media has torqued this story, I'm not sure. I'm not sure where we're going now.
That's really interesting, because I think I was at As It Happens when that happened. That's how long I've been doing this. And I completely agree with you. When you can take an event that should be, if not at least neutrally tolerated, maybe even heroic on some level, and spin it into this ugly garbage for your own political ends, and do it without apparently any remorse whatsoever, and nobody calling them out to account because the media is all in on it, we have really lost something in this country. And I think the Tiananmen Square analogy is perfect. I agree with you. It's really smart.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what would have happened if instead, opposition leader Jagmeet Singh of the NDP, the Workers' Party, had gone down and walked amongst the protesters? What if he had talked to chock-a-block of Sikh truck drivers who were there at food booths, and just talk to them? I mean, maybe he could have, brokered a deal for some conversation. Maybe that conversation would only have ended up possibly saying the government might have said, okay, but you still have to have a PCR test to cross the border, you truckers. But with regarding all the other mandates and measures, we're not moving an inch. But I mean, something could have happened. I mean, there were a lot of people, as I understand, who had gone to the protest thinking they'd only be there. Like they just packed, a bag for, a couple of pairs of socks and shirts and so on. They weren't there for they didn't plan to be there for a long time, but the prime minister's reluctance to have anyone at all meet with them. They expected to have someone meet with them because back in 1935, even with the protest with unemployment and the On to Ottawa trek from Regina, when the 8 people met with R.B. Bennett, I mean, Bennett got into a shouting match with them and they were all escorted out of the room. But at least they met.
Well, and he took a knee with Black Lives Matter on Parliament Hill too, right? So he does go out.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, but you know what's interesting? Because I did talk to Tamara last week, and I said, would you guys, what would have happened if he'd come out, the prime minister, and talk to you? Would you have made a deal with him? And she said, absolutely. We were tired, right? I remember Chris Barber told me on the way there, I said, Chris, how long are you going to stay? He said, we're going to be there as long as it takes, But then I could see him and Tamara and others like really losing energy because they'd been there for a long time. It was really cold. The mainstream media was not reporting accurately on what they were doing. And, she said, yeah, we could have made a deal. We were already planning. There was a plan to move the trucks anyway that was ended up being violated, not by them, but he could have, Trudeau could have been a statesman. He could have been a leader. He could have gone out there and sorted it out, and it would have been sorted. I have no doubt about that at all, because I believe what Tamara and Chris and everybody else involved that I spoke to, that this was also about bringing the country together at a time when we were so divided, and the anti-vax rhetoric was, let's not even give them a transplant. They're terrible people, right? Like what a moment that would have been. And it would have stood him, I think, in good stead in the history books instead of what's happened here. The Emergencies Act was not needed specifically because they would have negotiated. I don't know why they didn't talk about that at the inquiry. Did they talk about why didn't Trudeau go out? They should have.
He and the National Security Advisor, the Prime Minister, Jody Thomas, and others talked about, we didn't know who to talk to. And I'm thinking, like, you've got people like Tom Marazzo and others who are in Danny Bulford, former security Buford for security for the Prime Minister, who are in constant contact with the Ottawa Police Service, working with the police liaison teams all the time to make sure the emergency lanes are clear and so on. You've got a number of them who are working with the City of Ottawa to reach the deal and the agreement, which they do on the 12th of February, and then they start moving all of the protest vehicles. 102 of them are moved out by noon on the 14th. Now, in the report, Paul Rouleau says that they didn't start moving any vehicles until 1 p.m. that day and hadn't completed moving the 102 vehicles out until 5 p.m., half an hour after the Prime Minister invokes the Emergencies Act. I have no idea why would he fudge the timeline that way and jimmy it in a way that's simply distorted and untrue. If the Prime Minister had waited for two more, until the 16th, 75% of all the vehicles would have been gone. And all this discussion about the need for tow trucks would be moot because you don't have to tow a vehicle that's already left.
I think this was a flex. I think it was a flex for Trudeau. That's how it felt to me. Anyway, very, very, but I believe what Tamara says about that. I mean, she and I were in pretty close contact during the whole thing, texting and talking and that sort of thing. And, I came to trust her. She has not been dishonest with me. And I think I understand her motivation quite well, and she's proven through a test of time to be, I think she's a pretty admirable human being, actually. I'll just say it. I suppose that's not very objective, but that's how I feel about her. And Chris, too. I mean, Chris was lovely. What a crushing event for all of us. I mean, I say this every time I talk about the convoy, but those people on the overpasses, I mean, I have friends who still say to me, oh my God, I felt finally I was human again. I was Canadian again. All those people bringing food and, it was so lovely. And then for the Prime Minister to just end it that way, it will leave a psychic scar on this country I don't think he gives a shit, but it will leave a scar on this country for a very, very long time for many of us who just wanted peace and to be left alone and to reconnect with our fellow Canadians because we missed them, It's
going to be really difficult because this, I know people who look back last year and they regard it as the year of the attempted insurrection. And so what do you do with that? Because for them, it's like they're writing a totally different history. And so, I mean, my motivation in part to write this article is to say no, that story cannot stand.
Well, thank you for it. I was shaken by it because it's exactly what we needed. How did it end up in Covert Action? Right? I mean, you guys that's a magazine that kind of exposes corrupt, spycraft and stuff. So is this seen by people in the know as a kind of an op in that way? Is that why it's in Covert Action?
Yes. I mean, Jeremy Kuzmarov, who invited me to write an article, he just asked me if there was anything I wanted to write. He had written a book review or an article that was largely a book review of a book I wrote. It was published in 2021 called Unanswered Questions, What the September 11th Families Asked and the 9/11 Commission Ignored, which is a book about the Family Steering Committee for the 9/11 Independent Commission and the 12 people, 11 women and one man who brought questions, really were the reason why the 9/11 Commission ever came to be. So that was the book review, and then after that came out in January, they came back to me and said, "Are you writing about anything else?" And that's what happened.
So that's interesting. Did you, in writing your 9/11 book, did you read Benjamin DeMott's whitewashes public service analysis of the?
Yes, I wrote. I'm sure I read it a half a dozen times.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I talked about it in relation to, obviously, to what happened in Ottawa around the POEC. I mean, it was the same. You see, I'm old enough to know now that they never do anything but let everybody off the hook, because these commissions are actually there to support the status quo, right? The Warren Commission, lone gunman, and whitewash as public service. Oh no, Bush was right to ignore the presidential daily briefing or whatever happened there.
Yeah,
planes as missiles. That report,
even the Titanic, Commission in England was also a whitewash.
Was it?
So,
in what way? What did they say? What did they say?
They gave an awful lot of latitude and there were some problems with people not doing the right thing, junior officers at the wireless,
Yes.
But the way it got kind of written up was more like, if only we'd done this or only if we'd done that. It's like the Keystone Cops of shipping. So that there are some people who are junior officers that made some bad calls, but it just didn't result in asking the hard questions. I mean, part of what happened with the Titanic, of course, is that the iron rod rivets were not all of the same quality all around the ship, and apparently some of the rivets near where the iceberg hit the ship, all popped off in a way that probably shouldn't have if they'd all been steel rivets. But anyway.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, then the compartments were also that they were kind of floodable, but they were supposed to compartmentalize the water, but they didn't. So it would flow from one to the next or something. And also, I think probably speeding through a field of icebergs in the middle of the night is probably not a good idea either, right? I think they were speeding, weren't they?
And they were speeding, and also the people at the mast who were on the lookout had not remembered to bring the goggles. I forget what the word is for that, but
binoculars.
The binoculars. Yeah, they left the binoculars. They would have seen. They would have seen it. The iceberg earlier if they'd had the binoculars, and it's all of that.
So the commissions do not exist to seek truth, and it is like Lucy in the football. I thought in the case of the truckers, it was so obvious that Rouleau would have to find for the truckers, if that's how we would have put it, but find that it was an overkill, I guess, in the use of the Emergencies Act. I did have that thought for a moment, even though I know better. But yeah, and it's exactly what Benjamin DeMott said too. It's the weaselly language. Everybody's a little bit wrong, nobody's really wrong, and fudging.
And as well, apparently it was news to Rouleau that the Chief Justice Hugh McLean in Ontario Court had issued not only a ruling on the 7th to stop honking and to say that the protest was legal, but that he also issued a second ruling on the 16th of February that the protest, again, was still legal. And so, for Rouleau to be learning about this after he publishes his report, I just don't know, he's got people around him. I mean, how is he, not knowing all kinds of things? And it's just, there's an awful lot of really, it seems like he just wanted to excuse everything and say, hey, freezing bank accounts is a great idea.
Yeah. Oh, I know. And you know what? We cannot live in a world that does not evaluate factual premises honestly. We have to live in a world of facts, and we don't on many, many fronts right now. Everything is kind of, just smushed together, and it's based on feelings and based on stereotypes, and it's often when the history of this time is written as a catastrophe, which I think it is. Are you following the the lockdown files in the Telegraph in London?
No, I should be. Yeah,
Get on it, because that Matt Hancock gave the WhatsApp messages he kept during lockdown times to a reporter for a book she was writing about him. And she was so pissed off about what she found in the way he was managing the lockdowns that she broke her NDA and released them all to the Telegraph. It's writing a big series, and it's absolutely hair-raising how utterly irresponsible and boneheaded they were in the management of COVID. And nothing that's happening there didn't also happen here or also in the States. They were all, it's just, they're just fools, the people who govern us now. Is it that these are a different class of people and were leaders better 50 years ago? I don't know. But boy, oh boy, they're just, nitwits now, it seems, dishonest ones to boot.
Yeah. Well, I think that I sense that there's a real change because and just even in the tone of conversation. I mean, back when there was discussions about Quebec separatism and René Lévesque becoming premier and all of that. I mean, there could be serious disagreements, but we were always able to talk about the facts, the evidence, the perspectives, and listen to them. And now that's kind of gone.
It's gone. It's absolutely gone. And I blame media primarily for it. They should have gone back to every single Liberal politician who told lies about the convoy, scrummed them and said, where did you get the evidence for X, Y, Z? Who told you about the rapes? Where did that come from? What was the reason you said that? What was it? And they didn't do it. They just, I say everything wrong in the West right now is the fault of legacy media, right? I do feel that way because they're letting bad people get away with terrible things because they align with them ideologically now on what appears to be some kind of a strange social justice, I think misguided social justice agenda. It wouldn't be happening if people were, that's why I love the Rebel News who, I don't love them, but they did a jump interview of Albert Bourla in Davos. I was jumping up and down in my office. I was so happy. I was like, wahoo, They should all, and they're doing it more. Somebody did it in East Palestine to Pete Buttigieg, so that was fun. So come on, guys, let's do it to the Liberals in Ottawa and get moving again on how we're supposed to hold people account.
Because otherwise we're going to become a whole nation that mimics what the leaders are doing. And so, a couple starts dating, and then the one's not happy with the other and says, I'm invoking the Emergencies Act.
Yeah. That's where we are today. It's brutal. Anyway, this is a remarkable piece, and it's by Ray Mcginnis, that is you, and it's in the February 28th, 2023 issue of Covert Action, which is a website, and you just Google that and you'll get it, right?
Yeah, covertactionmagazine.com.
Okay, and I'm going to do a Substack on this too and put a link so we can maybe drive some readership. But thank you so much for doing it. I'm super grateful. It's really good.
Well, I'm delighted to be speaking with you, Trish. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Ray. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, take care.
Bye. That is available in the online magazine Covert Action. And as I said, you should probably print it off and hand it out to people who don't understand what happened to us around the trucker convoy. Okay, as I was mentioning at the beginning of the show, the woman who leaked the WhatsApp messages to the Telegraph is named Isabel Oakeshott, and she is a senior editor at Talk TV in the UK. And she did say that she got a kind of a nasty text message from Matt Hancock, the minister, whose WhatsApp messages she delivered to the media in a kind of a whistleblower capacity. I think she violated an NDA or something like an NDA. Anyway, so she did talk about that. And this is a clip of her being pretty brave on Talk TV, talking to Julia Hartley Brewer, who I like. She's been pretty good on COVID. And here she is responding to what she heard that he said about her characterizing what he wrote as being threatening. So this is Isabel Oakeshott.
Ask you. He says, last night I was accused, you were speaking on Piers Morgan's show last night, and he said, I was accused of sending menacing messages to Isabel. You used the word menacing as a message you got in response to Matt Hancock after you informed him late on Monday night that these files were coming out. He says, this is wrong. He says, when I had confused rumours of a publication late on Tuesday night, I called and messaged Isabel to ask her if she had any clues about it, got no response. And I then saw what she'd done. I messaged to say it was, quote, a big mistake, unquote, nothing more. Is that all he messaged you?
Well, I don't like getting messages at 1:20 in the morning saying you have made a big mistake. I think Matt Hancock himself has made some pretty serious mistakes, but I'm very clear that I really, in an ideal world, do not want to get into a public slanging match with Matt Hancock. If he wants to sink to those levels, then I will leave that to him, because this, for once, Matt, and may I address this directly to you, is not about you. I know you think it's all about you, but it isn't. It is about the entire nation that suffered as a result of flawed policies. It's much bigger than you on this occasion. Sorry to break it to you.
Isabel, I end a lot of my tweets about this saying never forgive, never forget. Should we forgive and forget?
You know, I'm really struggling not to get angry again. And I want to try to be cool and objective about this, because that is what we must do. But I also believe that, in a sense, we need to be angry. It's all very well for those of us with nice jobs and nice houses and plenty of opportunities to say, as one former very prominent cabinet minister messaged me, oh, shrug, shrug, it's all in the past. I think people have moved on. Well, actually, no, they haven't. There are people paying a devastating price, and the next pandemic could be just around the corner. There seems to be nothing more important, nothing, than avoiding this ever happening again.
Wow. I wish we had bold voices like that in something approaching mainstream media, but we don't, do we? We do not have that. And I wonder what would happen if a whistleblower approached the Globe and Mail with a tranche of ministerial WhatsApp messages exposing the perfidy of the COVID response. I don't know. Canada has the worst. We have, like, Uruguay has better media than we do, right? Like, our media right now is one of the worst in the world. Absolutely. On COVID, on the truckers, on all kinds of stuff. They're starting to figure it out about Trudeau, but boy, a day late and a dollar short, to quote my father. But I'm encouraged by what the Telegraph is doing, and it may have influence around the world. One can only hope. Final word. Pardon my French. I got a lot of responses to my apology to a listener about using the phrase pardon my French. And you know what I did? I deep dove it, I guess. And I found out a lot of interesting things. And I also got a number of really cool emails from people with thoughts on that. Well, I'm going to put together a little segment to do on next week's show about pardon my French and why we should and shouldn't alter our speech when we ask to. I know everybody's got an opinion on it these days, so stick around for that. And if you have something you want to say about pardon my French, feel free to email it to me, and I'll try to get it on next week when we talk about it. But in the meantime, stay critical. See ya.